Okay, 7th grade, now we're doing your 1 John study guide vocab. So you don't actually have very much, let's see, you got 15 terms by my count. That's pretty good, not too bad. All right, first one, Patmos. Patmos is the island on which St. John the Apostle was exiled for a good chunk of his life. It's where he received the vision that allowed him to write his apocalypse. The Word. So the Word is a term that John uses to refer to the incarnate second person of the Trinity. Right? The Word is logos. Right? It's where we get the word knowledge, logic from. Right? So when John uses the phrase the Word, like in the beginning of 1 John and in the beginning of his gospel, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. All things were made by him, and without him was made nothing that was made. I'm trying to remember the rest. I used to have that memorized. I think I forgot parts of it, though. Anyways, so yeah, the Word, when he's talking like that, he's referring to the second person of the Trinity incarnated, so Jesus Christ. All right, last hour. Last hour is a term that John uses to refer to the eschatological era, which, remember, is the end times, which is the period of time that stretches from the Incarnation all the way through the Parousia. Servile fear. Servile fear is a type of fear that people may have of God, but it's not the correct type of fear. Right? Servile fear means you fear God because you obey God's laws, not because you love God, but because you see God as this big punisher, right? Who's going to send you to hell if you do the wrong thing. That's servile fear. Right? It's not the correct kind of fear. It's not holy fear. Caritas. Caritas is a term that gets translated often as charity or love. Caritas is Christian love. It means loving God because you love God, and loving your neighbor because you love God. All right, Apocalypse. Apocalypse is the title of John's book, the last book of the Bible. Remember, John wrote a gospel, he wrote 3 epistles, and then he wrote the book of the Apocalypse. It's also called the book of Revelation sometimes. Cerinthianism. This is a heresy. It's a type of Gnostic heresy. Cerinthians have very specific heretical beliefs. For example, they believe that Jesus and Christ are 2 separate entities. They think Jesus was a person who was conceived and born in a totally natural way, and then when he was baptized, Christ came down from heaven and possessed his body, and then when he was crucified, they believe Christ left Jesus' body and Jesus died on the cross. That's what Cerinthians believe. It's a heresy, a false belief. Beatific Vision. This is a term that the church uses to refer to heaven. So the Beatific Vision is what happens in heaven. It's the pure, unfiltered, direct experience of God. Magisterium. Magisterium is the teaching authority of the church. So the Magisterium belonged at first to the apostles, and then through apostolic succession, it was passed down to the bishops. Of course, the Pope also has a special kind of magisterium that has primacy over the other apostles and over the bishops. Right, so magisterium is the teaching authority of the church. Catholics are required to obey the magisterium. Divine filiation. Divine filiation is a term that refers to a Christian being an adopted son or daughter of God through baptism. Right? Through baptism, we become adopted sons and daughters of God. We receive graces from God through our baptism. It's not just like symbolic language to show that God loves us. No, we are literally adopted children of God. Right? He's taken us into his family as his children. To know. So, to know is a phrase that is very relevant to the first letter of John. Right? Because to know, the verb to know, has different meanings. For the Gnostics, the verb to know means intellectual knowledge of God, like secret knowledge that you possess of God, right? And they believe that this knowledge protects them from the effects of sin, or basically preserves them from sin, keeps them pure, right? That's not the biblical sense of to know, right? In the Old Testament, the verb to know means to be united to another, not just intellectually, but also physically, right? So through sexual congress, right? So when Adam has sexual relations with his wife, the author of Genesis describes it as Adam knew his wife, right? What does this have to do with 1 John? Well, 1 John takes that idea from Genesis and he extends it into a relationship with God. So to know God is something that a Christian is capable of intellectually, on a physical level through the Eucharist, but also, and this is what John adds to it, by being spiritually united to God. So John, according to John, the Christians know God better than the Corinthians do, because first off, they don't have false beliefs about God. Secondly, they physically know God through the Eucharist. But thirdly, they follow God's laws. So they are united to God spiritually, whereas the Corinthians commit all kinds of sins of lust and greed, for example, that separate them from God. All right, that one was kind of long. Incarnation. The Incarnation is when the Word became flesh. It's when the second person of the Trinity became a single-celled zygote inside of Mary's womb. Right? It's that instant when Christ incarnated in Mary's womb. It also marks the beginning of the eschatological era. A thesis. So a thesis is where John is writing, sending his first epistle. Right? It's a city in Asia Minor. Gnostic. Gnostic is an umbrella term for all kinds of different heresies. Basically, Gnostics believe that they have special knowledge of God that insulates them from sin and its effects. Gnostic comes from a Greek word, gnosis, which means knowledge. Typically, Gnostics see the world in competition between good and evil. Right? They think evil is like a real powerful force in the world that is always competing with God and goodness. Gnostics also tend to believe that material things like our bodies and the physical world is bad. Right? They think that spiritual things are good and material things are bad. Right? So all of these things describe Gnostic heresies. And finally, Antichrist. So Antichrist is a word that John uses a lot. Basically, it refers to any person, force, idea, group that is opposed to Christ's church. Right? So the presence of Antichrists is a sign of the eschatological era, a sign of the end times. Right? And most people, when they read John, they interpret it to suggest that there will be Antichrist throughout history, but that the Antichrist will become more and more powerful as we move closer to the end of the world. All right, that's it for the vocab.